think we used to have a just-in-time or a really highly efficient supply chain mentality. Are we going to move to a just-in-case philosophy and we should be holding more inventory? We're going to have more excess capacity because we want to own the capacity. Or will we see a complete transition to people being highly flexible in how they manage logistics?
Welcome to Chain Reaction, the podcast for the supply chain and logistics industry. If you enjoy this conversation, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of Chain Reaction Podcast. I'm Michael Ostroumov, CEO of FLOX Logistics Marketplace. Today, I'm joined by Chris Clowes, COO of FLOX. Alongside external guests, we also will be sharing our own perspective on the market, the challenges that shaping logistics industry and operations, and how FLOX is positioned to address them. But before we begin, I'd like to remind the viewers to please subscribe to the channel. It helps us grow. It helps us reaching out to a kind of a wider audience who will benefit from this conversation. So, Chris, welcome back.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Yes, thank you. You too. Today, we're going to talk about where the logistics industry really stands in 2025, what it means for 2026, not from a headline perspective, but kind of from an operational one. So, interestingly, kind of the one thing that we talked about that previously. So, wanted to kind of looking back at 2025, some people I've heard describe that as depressed but stable. I'm not sure that stability is the right word to describe. I'm not talking geopolitics. I'm talking logistics. So let's just stick with that. So what do you think? How would you describe that?
Yeah, I think that volumes have been difficult last year. I think there was a lot of geopolitical pressure, a lot of major political change with governments across kind of major economies. I think in the UK specifically, we had the latest ever autumn budget statement, which I think held up some spending as people anticipated. Probably a worse budget than actually came through. And I think throughout 2025, that probably kept volumes low and space available in warehouses and probably depressed rates when it comes to vehicles and truck movements. Speaking to some providers, they think that that's potentially a positive thing because there is still a driver shortage out there. It's just being hidden at the moment because volumes are lower. So I think stable but depressed, probably a good example. I think 2025, we didn't quite see that the major kind of supply chain shocks that we'd perhaps seen between 2020 and 2024.
Well, I heard you mention that kind of the previous volumes kind of no longer exist, and the market is in kind of a depressed lower volume state. But do you see, or have you seen or heard that the people are still wrestling with the volatility of volume? So there is nothing one day, and there is a tons of volume the day after, and the people are scrambling with the peaks and troughs. So do you see any of that still impacting the sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to an electrical products manufacturer, and last year they were describing their, let me get it right, October and November was really suppressed, but then December was one of their best ever months. And no rhyme or reason. You could perhaps link it to the budget in the UK, but correlation is not necessarily causation. So yeah, I think things are becoming a whole lot less predictable, I guess, driven by consumer demand generally. But the major shocks that we saw maybe in 24 and previously, I think have quietened down. And I actually think it's remarkable how robustly supply chains have managed to deal with crisis after crisis that's been thrown at them. I think the World Economic Forum or the World Economic Bank, they just did their forecast upgrades for the G7, and the US was predicted to grow at 2 or 3%, strongest growth out of anyone. And through a range of actions that manufacturers and retailers took in the US, the actual impact of tariffs has been very, very small. I think there's a question of the impact on jobs. I think the US has had the lowest job growth ever in the last couple of kind of periods. But yeah, I think the major shocks have gone and the supply chains have been largely resilient. But when volume comes in intra-month is much more difficult to predict.
Mm. Well, one of the things that it's interesting point about the resilience and the volatility, because one of the things that we talked about that in the past is the idea of a steady state network. Because when there's a steady state, where there's a stable flows or easily forecastable flows within reason, then especially for bigger corporates, it's much easier to kind of optimize the setups and optimize the environment. So it's optimized for efficiency, for cost, for service, and so forth. But is there a such thing as a steady state these days?
I think looking at the two aspects, I think the short answer is no. That we now live in a world that is constantly facing kind of major crises, and I think that will carry on. That people have to react to. But then I also think that the days of I have a summer peak, I have a winter peak, depending on what industry you're in, I think have gone. I remember once talking to a garden manufacturer and or a garden furniture products manufacturer, and him saying that based on my sales in the second week of March, and depending on where Easter falls, I can almost guarantee my sales profile for the rest of the year. It always happens. And him saying that for the past few years that just hasn't happened. I think the post-COVID purchasing, when everyone had a lot of money because they weren't allowed to do anything, I think created a kind of brought forward demand, and we're now seeing that settle. But just people's purchasing habits, I think, have potentially fundamentally changed, meaning that there's no business as usual anymore. It's about how you react.
Well, that's the thing. You mentioned business as usual, and this is what I'm kind of on the back of my mind as well. So, business as usual also means how do I run my logistics? How do I run my operations? How do I optimize it? And the usual approaches typically work around, well, I have average price per drop and an average number of, I don't know, stops per route and that kind of stuff. So, but the problem is turning into is that the averages no longer work because the averages could be misleading. As I like that statement, it's like average temperature in the hospital is normal, but somebody has a fever, somebody's in the morgue.
Yeah.
And you actually need to accommodate for those extremes as well as anything in between. So, and actually, as a reflection on that, we also see an increase in operators, the logistics service providers struggling because they're working on a very thin margins, and we've seen the growth in bankruptcies, we've seen the growth on M&A. So can we? And I think there's two aspects, and I would probably want you to kind of touch on both of them. It's like, what are the kind of de-averaging and the way of approaching the business, approaching the cost and running day-to-day operations, kind of the pressures on that side, and what kind of a knock-on effect that we are seeing with the corporate struggles and M&As, and then potentially that will give us the sense of how we can look forward into
Yeah.
26. And
I always remember early in my career someone talking about resource, and your volume does this, and you permanently resource up to your lowest point, and then you use flexible labor to deal, or whether resource to deal with the peaks. And I think that principle still stands. It's just that the peak and the trough have become so much bigger that your core resource level might only be there to cover 50, 60%, whereas before it used to cover 80% maybe. And I think that brings challenges in terms of how you manage assets, whether it's vehicles or warehouses, resources like people or MHE. And it's difficult. And I think it potentially brings a change in mindset as to what you operate internally. Do you now need just more flexible on-demand warehousing? Do you need more flexible on-demand access to vehicles? And actually, the traditional way of going out, doing a tender, finding someone to run your logistics for 5 years now doesn't work. So I think that certainly I don't, and I'm not sure anyone else has the answer to that yet. It's difficult, and you see it in automation with warehouses that I think Tesco, M&S, and Nike have all made big automation commitments in the UK recently. But this week it was announced that Zalando is closing down a highly automated warehouse in Germany, with the loss of 2,500 jobs because they've managed to deploy almost humanoid-like robots in their existing facilities that can pick and pack and move products around more efficiently and retrofit into smaller operations. I think even for an organization the size of Zalando, those peaks and troughs means that the old business case for a giant automated million square meter warehouse no longer is producing the ROI. And actually, will we see more iterative projects, small retrofits of existing sites, if people decide they don't want to go down the line of more flexible resource? Because businesses still like the idea that I want to have my warehouse, I want to have my trucks and trailers, because it brings a security blanket. And that security blanket is necessary because of all the crises and the issues that we've had in the last 5 years. So are people now, I think we used to have a just in time or a really highly efficient supply chain mentality. Are we going to move to a just in case philosophy and we should be holding more inventory? We're going to have more excess capacity because we want to own the capacity. Or will we see a complete transition to people being highly flexible in how they manage logistics? So a slightly long-winded, elongated answer, but I think it's a difficult question that I think today's supply chain logistics leaders are in the process of answering today, and I don't think anyone has the answer yet.
Well, that's interesting. Because this is a very very good point that you bring it up is the whether the ownership of capacity is a security blanket or it is a necessity, which makes it a part of an operating model. So one of the main things that what FLOX is trying to do is to bring a virtual 4PL type functionality and the service proposition to the market, so the players can. The companies and the manufacturers have a direct ability to kind of control and manage their logistics operations without, let's call it, a burden of ownership of the physical assets and that is actually an interesting thing. It's the idea of the future 4PL is not a company, is an operating model which could be applied. I mean, Apple is a great example. They don't necessarily own the production, although they try to get and bring some physical production back into the US, but they don't own the production, whilst it is one of the most successful companies on the planet. So, and there's lots of businesses like that. And I always been thinking that, I mean, take retailers and take, I don't know, big manufacturers of, I don't know, beverages or confectionery or clothing items. Well, okay, maybe not clothing, but at least they are not logistics businesses. They don't necessarily are best at everything. They are best at producing chocolate bars. They're not best at moving trucks. So why don't you give professionals the with the right degrees and right degrees of control, the professionals the job of fulfilling your logistics obligations? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what's written on the side of the truck, as long as it works efficiently, shows up when it needs to be, does the temperature control as expected, and does the job well at the right cost. So this is what we're trying to do. So how do you think and how do you see the market is resonating with this virtuality and the external management and the 4PL type model rather than the ownership?
So it's a big question. I so I think that most companies have got their head around outsourcing logistics. Unless you've got a very large network of 2,000 stores, 10 warehouses, most companies are outsourcing some part, if not all, of their logistics operation, so trucks and sheds, warehouses. Um, and I think the way that people outsource is changing. So, and this is a very micro experience because it's just mine, but when I entered the industry 20 years ago, I think people's approach was, I'm going to outsource a headache, but I still want absolute control over it. So they did open book contracts. I think in that time, people are moving more towards activity-based and closed book contracts, which gives them certainty over cost and or a large certainty over cost, but moves an awful lot of risk to the 3PL because they've got 5 or 10 year liabilities, but they've only got a 2 or 3 year contract. And I think that's what's stopping lots of automation projects and developments because we are looking at outsourcing, or the industry is looking at outsourcing logistics the same way as it looks at buying, I don't know, printer equipment, which is, I'm sure Xerox would argue differently, but it's a relatively commoditized product that doesn't add too much value. So, whereas logistics does, and I think people are looking at contracts generally when they outsource to short term. So we've kind of had that open book, we're now closed book and very short term commoditized. So how far away are people looking at treating it as a completely flexible resource? I think some way away. I think people still will go out to tender 5 year contract. I've got these lanes. I have this warehouse. Can you help? And I think it comes back to that security blanket that, well, I
Mm.
know I've contracted for someone for that volume for that lane. Um, and if you look at it on the opposite side from the 3PL's perspective, they're under huge cost pressures throughout the entire value chain at the moment, whether it's a truck, a trailer, electrification, carbon reduction, drivers' wages, insurance, tolls and fees for using roads. Everything is going up. So to operate a truck, whether it's the capital £300,000 to buy an electric truck or the £100,000 a year OPEX cost for maintenance and that's a lot of money to operate on a flexible basis. So I think that the challenge is both sides. The people commissioning logistics services want a safety blanket and know that that's my truck, even if it isn't, quite literally. And the 3PL operators that own the asset, they very much, well, I need this truck moving, otherwise it's costing me and I'm not earning anything. And if I've got a warehouse, I need it 85, 95% full, because otherwise it's costing me money. So I think there's a big mentality shift that's required first. Um, and I'm not sure what might drive that mentality shift, in all honesty. It's a tough one at the moment.
Well, interesting. 'Cause you mentioned a few things, and I want to kind of unpack it a little bit. So, the first of all, we're talking about the two sides of this relationship. So we have kind of the manufacturers and buyers of logistics, and we have logistics service providers and kind of suppliers, the supply side of this equation. Let's stay with the demand side just for a second. And there you mentioned a couple of things, and especially in terms of control, and those are the things that I'd like to kind of explore a bit more. So, yes, people are absolutely under pressure for costs. And we also talked about earlier, yes, people are under pressure on resilience, flexibility, service level delivery, and so forth, which is which drives two elements of what I want the control of. Do I want control costs or do I want to control operations? Um, and the reason what my argument is going to be the control of the operations and better degree of control over exactly what's going on is more important than costs because costs are the result. If I'm in control of what I'm doing, I can then see exactly where my leakages are and where am I wasting money. But if I'm just simply running a tender for the sake of having, I don't know, 5% off my last year's contract, or manage an increase, that is not necessarily control. It's an illusion of control. And I think, or I feel, I'd like, and that we go back to the whole kind of, am I properly in control of things, or do I want a comfort blanket and delude myself that I have the control? So what do you say? So I think, and this is my view, and I think the control bit, direct control over your logistics operations, not through closed or open book contracts, but through visibility, analytics, reports and dashboarding, live on time, predictive inputs and the feedback. I think this is the future, but whether the people are ready for that or not, that's I think what you alluded to.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that actually knocking 5% off is illusion of control and it's not actual control. And I think that logistics is the end point where all issues tend to get manifested. And typically, if a vehicle is costing too much or a warehouse is full or empty, the problem doesn't tend to be with the logistics operation. It tends to be way further back down the supply chain. And whether the supply chain team have ordered too much or too little, or the commercial team's forecast is wrong, or we haven't paid a supplier on time and they've therefore delayed a delivery, the logistics actually performs quite well in terms of cost and service level already. Like most people will be running full load trucks into DCs at 99% service levels, parcel delivery 97, 98, pick is 99 point something, inventory accuracy 99 point something. Like they are good KPIs across any operation, despite all the challenges that are then thrown at them that end up at the bottom of the pile, which is the logistics operation. So if you want to improve logistics, and whether it's cost or service, the issue tends to be somewhere else, and you need to fix that. The challenge for logistics leaders is how much influence do they have over that process? Can they go back to the commercial team and say, I need X, Y, and Z, or the purchasing team and say, I need A, B, and C? Um, and I think it's been a tension that's existed since businesses started. You have people
Mm.
that are there to grow the top line, and you have people that are there to protect and reduce the cost and the OPEX base. And there's that logistics is seen as a cost. Yes, it's an enabler to growing the top line, but generally in most businesses, it's a cost. So, how do I make it as cheap as possible? And I think that's going to be the challenge is how do we pivot away from this finding a perfect partner to do what you want them to do or what you think they need to do to having a network of partners that you can rebalance flexibly and have that
Mm.
visibility, and you can even prioritize cost. So the concept of serving customer A differently to customer B because they are more important, whether that's revenue, profit, visibility, is a concept that's been around for a long time, but not many industries or businesses are very good at implementing it. Systems tend to be one size fits all. So you're treating the customer that generates 0.1% of your profit the same as you do the customer that generates 10% of your profit. So, again, a slightly long winded answer. I'm very loquacious today. How I think everyone is aware of this. Has anyone got the capacity or the inclination to change it?
Mm.
Throughout not just supply chains, but through businesses to move towards just not just, but to better visibility, better orchestration, better service levels, rather than just focusing on cost.
You are listening to Chain Reaction. This podcast is brought to you by FLOX, the leading marketplace for the supply chain and logistics industry. Visit flox.is to find out how you find the perfect supplier or make your services available to prospective buyers. Thanks for tuning in. Now back to the show.
Well, my thoughts on that is, I think it's we are gradually getting towards people kind of recognizing that logistics is not just a cost. It's an enable. It's not just an enabler of service delivery, but it's an enabler of revenue. And the penalty for having bad logistics is not excessive cost of logistics. It's loss of revenue, loss of margin at a much larger scale. And then the volatility and the need for resilience that we currently see, hopefully kind of shaking the cage, so people are getting away from kind of rigid concepts of how it has been running in the past, and now actually paying more attention. This is where we're coming from with FLOX, and now paying more attention to the technological enablement of being able to have technology This is what my thoughts are. The technology, the platform, the FLOX that we do is like reins that you have on the horse cart, or you have multiple horses, so you have a carriage. So you actually, those are the controls that you have. Those are not your horses necessarily. This is not necessarily your carriage, but you're in a driving seat and you have the reins and you know precisely what you're doing, which way you're pulling, are you stopping, are you accelerating, and what. And and technology is the enabler, but the technology also needs to provide, it needs to be up to date. It needs to be clear. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be complete. It needs to be comprehensive. There's a lots of must have. So it is properly can be used as a single point of truth. And this is interesting. And that's what can be enabling that kind of the virtual 4PL type modular setup. So that's what we talked about. But I want to step back a little bit, because the other thing that I said that we're going to park is the supply side of the marketplace, of the logistic service providers that are struggling and have been struggling for years. And since the whole episode is about kind of the 2025 and looking into 26, 25 has been quite eventful in terms of M&A. We have seen people reporting quite a lot of bankruptcies across the industries, which is very, very unfortunate. Some of that is due to market conditions, some of that is due to kind of the governmental actions and the legislation and so forth. But this is what. So, can you reflect a little bit on the 2025 for the supply side, the logistics service providers bit, and how that may affect or drive the thinking and the logic and the operating model from them, whether it be more of a wide range 3PLs or focused players that are specifically really razor sharp on delivery, just haulage or last mile or warehousing, and then what the 26 might look and hold in store for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there is probably one transaction or example that answers all of those questions, which was DSV's acquisition of DB Schenker. Two very different cultures, right at the very top of the market in terms of scale and size. So I think from a freight forwarding or air and sea freight perspective, 3 and 4 in the world. Putting aside cultural differences between a quasi state-owned business in DB Schenker and a Denmark list or Danish listed business that's very entrepreneurial, acquisition led, much newer. You have two very different operating principles where, and certainly in road, where DSV is asset light and DB Schenker has its own assets. And I think that probably demonstrates where large 3PLs are heading, is to be more asset light. They don't typically own their warehouse. They will typically rent it. They certainly rarely own trucks at any scale these days. I think DSV have 25,000 trailers that run around Europe, but they're all pulled by individual contractors. So I think that is a microcosm, will show where the top end of the market is going. But what you then need is smaller individual logistics or transport companies, I think in particular, that can do those transport legs, and that DSV are orchestrating and managing on a 4PL basis. And if the challenges for those small companies are so large, whether it's drivers, no one in the family that wants to take over the business, decarbonisation, government taxes, even when they're getting regular business from someone like DSV or DHL, they're not going to survive because the business is just so hard. And as you'd expect, someone the size of DSV is going to drive down the price as much as possible and maximize their revenue and profit. So I think there's a real risk that what's ultimately the backbone of logistics, small transport operators, disappears because of all of those reasons. Someone in the family doesn't want to take it over. I've got Euro 6 engines and I'm going to have to go to electrification or Euro 7 or something else. And actually, it's just too much hassle for me. So I just wind the company up. Or all my drivers are in their 60s and are going to retire in 5 years' time, or I'm paying yet another tax, and
Mm.
whether it's fuel, road surcharging, employment surcharges, um, congestion charge, environment charges, that they're just everywhere. So I think that on a macro level, large 3PLs are going more asset light, and the real risk there, particularly with road transport, is that the smaller transport companies won't exist to fulfill the requirements of these asset light large 4PLs. And that's going to be an interesting development, I think, into 26 and beyond.
Yeah, that sounds like is going to be a really, really big challenge. So definitely 26, 27, the way that it looks today, it's not going to be about growth. It's going to be about survival. I wouldn't even call consolidation. Whether we're going to see more M&A or not, that's beyond. Besides the
We've
question, I
even
think it's going
seen it
to. Yeah.
in the last couple of weeks. I think I've seen two announcements of two relatively small, like 20 vehicles, one warehouse, of two transport operators merging. Um, and so you're even seeing that well-run individual businesses that are turning over millions of pounds, but the
Mm,
margin is so low that they're saying we need to bring our capability together. And yes, if you've got a family player in the north and one in the south, they have a much stronger offer if they're together. Um, but you're even seeing it at the lower end of the market in terms of size that
mm.
people are merging, and I think that's a relatively new phenomenon.
Yeah, the market is massively fragmented, and there are hundreds of thousands across Europe and globally, kind of the smaller players, SME players with a turnover of, I don't know, 10, 15, 20, 50 million, that actually may benefit from merging, or could be potential candidates for that. And actually, I've seen on the market the small SME operators could be actually relatively successful, actually looking to exit, looking to sell. Um, which goes back to the economic environment, whether they can find the funding. Because again, running on a thin margin, well, it's very hard to secure a reasonably priced funding to
Yeah.
acquire another business, no matter how much sense it makes on paper. So that is definitely an area of concern. And yeah, the 2026 does not promise a lot of a lot of upsides, accidentals, and we don't think that we are definitely out of the woods. So there's lots of still the challenges ahead, and the market is going to be really, really facing difficult times and difficult periods. The one thing that I've would like to say though is like what it means to kind of for where I'm sitting is the stability is not returning, but the price of mistakes getting higher. And one of the problems, and I'd like to comment on that as well. I see a lot of people are kind of sitting on their hands and afraid of making any moves whatsoever.
Yeah, I think the last couple of years have been about reacting to what's happened, and that has stopped people making iterative improvements or changes. I think that the maybe towards the back end of last year and going into this year, I think people are realizing they have to do something. That the
Hmm.
the way we've carried on, or we finally need to make a decision. Are we going to move warehouses, change the way that we work, change our kind of route to market strategy? Um, but I still think there's a huge amount of pressure within larger corporations, and I think a report came out from Alex Partners yesterday talking that CEOs are feeling the most pressure that they have in the 8 years of Alex Partners doing this report. And really interestingly, that the CEOs have got the least amount of confidence in their team that has ever been registered in the last 8 years of Alex Partners doing this report. And you think, wow, that's interesting. So if I'm the CEO, I've got no confidence in my COO, my CFO, my CIO. Like, I mean, that's tough. And this is all against the backdrop. And this is really interesting and slightly off topic of share prices, company share prices, the overall stock exchanges around the world hitting record highs. So company share prices are not really reflecting the mood. And there's a question there that actually says, if we keep being fed bad news by the press and by social media the whole time, do we eventually just believe it? Because actually, maybe life is actually pretty good. But I'm definitely going off topic now, so edit this out.
Okay. No, I mean, no, I think it's a fair topic and fair observation in terms of, yeah, the share prices are going up, but I think it's as pretty much everything is a function of supply and demand, and I think the problem here is, and this is my kind of hunch, and again off topic, but it's yeah, to your earlier point, the confidence in the business and ability to run it effectively and grow and produce profit by that sense of that has not dramatically improved. That is probably even kind of, if flat at best, maybe is decreasing. I think what is happening is the demand side of things. It's just there's so much money plowed into the economy. Just so many buyers are sitting on free cash, and that's why they're buying something.
Yeah, yeah,
And that probably what is almost like, it's like almost inflationary rather than the actual tangible performance
yeah.
driven. But we're talking about sort of off topic, and I try to kind of bring back to the topic, but I'll try to also kind of, we're getting to the latter part or the end of the episode, and I would like to kind of finish it on a positive note, in the sense that what we talked about, that the kind of, on one hand the price of mistakes is getting bigger, but on the other hand, I think the winners that will emerge from that, let's call it a downturn, or the currently depressed state, I think the winners will be the ones that make kind of a bold decisions, and really do something. So just simply grinding through may not necessarily, it may ensure survival, but it will not ensure that you will emerge on the top when the next phase of market growth, kind of global growth, will kick in, which may be a couple of years down the line, but still. And I think the winners in my mind would be the people that actually embrace the new opportunities that the modern setup, and the modern technologies and the ways of working and the operational models actually bring. So the people that will embrace that will emerge on top. That will emerge are the ones that in the leading position, with the ability to capture higher margins, higher profile clients, higher growth clients, and so forth. So this is what I think. And then for the logistics sector, it's been quite conservative, to say the least, over the decades. And we are a technology company, and we have on the podcast, and we do a lot of reports, and we're talking about how AI is contributing to this. Yeah, there are no panacea, there's no silver bullet there, but it's the tech that will, there are no killer applications, but it's the tech that will enable something. It will enable business models. It will enable the way of working. It will enable people that are keen to explore and play with some elements of the service offering. It will differentiate them,
Yeah,
and that's where they came out on top. That's how you win tenders. That's how you win best clients.
I think it's a really interesting idea that this whole sort of survive versus thrive in a world or an economy that has generally been fairly stagnant for a decade. I think since 2008, we never really saw a significant recovery of business confidence or investment. And I think you look at after the last financial crisis, a load of new technology came to the market and business models actually as well. And actually,
Mm.
are we due a new financial crisis? We tend to get them every 20 years, so we're probably due one. And actually, will logistics finally be hit substantially enough that the business model has to change? And then the technology will be there to help it. Because substantially, 2008, 1992, logistics hasn't fundamentally changed in the way that we work. But actually, will the equivalent of Uber, Airbnb, those apps that kind of came about that are B2C
Mm.
facing but
Yeah.
came around after the last financial crisis, will we see something that truly disrupts the way that logistics works after the coming out of the next major economic shock? Um,
Yeah.
and actually, we therefore might see more players coming out and starting to thrive rather than just surviving and kind of
Mm.
this. Um, Yeah, surviving is the right word, I think.
No, I think it's a great point. Yeah, we have recessions, depressions. Well, depressions are happening less frequently, but recessions are happening regularly, and we certainly kind of, it feels like we do one, whether we want to call it as such or politicians want to call it as such or not. But I think, yeah, I agree with you that the previous ones have not really impacted logistics industry or the way that logistics and the supply chain sector kind of works. I think now it will impact with the that it will impact to such an extent that actually the new business models and the ways of working are going to emerge differently. And I think there are three elements there. One is definitely robotics. You mentioned that it's like how you can improve your warehouse operations, but having humanoid type robots versus multi-million pound implementation of automated warehousing. So that robotics is going to change. I think autonomous driving, that's another step. I mean, if legislatively my driver can drive only, or can only be on the road for 6 to 8 hours, that's it. And for the rest of the time, the truck, it needs to be stationary. Well, that's a lost. It's like with an airplane. It's not, if it's not in the air, it loses money. The
Yeah.
same thing. If a truck is not on the road, it loses money. So essentially, the autonomous driving will get it to the next level of efficiency. And I think the third area, I think this is where we coming from, and where the FLOX is coming from, is the orchestration platform, is the technological integration layers that will allow a much better control and collaboration of the kind of interdependent flows, whether it's horizontal or whether it's vertical, upstream and downstream. I think this is I think that is a good note on which we can. The future is. It's not the train coming. I think there is a light out there, and I think the industry can emerge differently, but hopefully in a better shape.
And I think a great example of that, especially that covers the last 2 points, is budget airlines. So
Mm,
they went from going from point A to point B and back to having this network of flights and hubs that span across large geographies. And actually, I just take the planes to where the demand is. So if I fly back from Vienna, and it's interesting, you look at the legacy carriers, BA and Austrian, they tend to fly
mm,
backwards and forwards between Vienna and Heathrow. You look at the budget airlines, the plane has come in from God knows where, is going to an array of UK airports, and then is flying off to somewhere else. It's not flying back to
yeah,
Vienna generally. So I think that, and that we don't have that in trucking generally, and we've actually gone back from that. It used to be called a tramper, I guess, and
mm,
now actually people want to be nearer to their base, go home, work-life balance is better. So it's interesting that for pilots, we've got this concept of moving around and tramping, and maybe it's a bit more glamorous going from Vienna to Porto than it is going from Birmingham to Manchester. But I think there is an industry there that was very ingrained that got changed through sheer will of I think Southwest and Ryanair in Europe and Southwest in the US. So yeah, maybe there is an example that the industry can follow. It just feels a long way off at the moment.
yeah, no, it is a way off, but I think as we talked earlier, so maybe the current economic climate is actually going to force the change,
Yeah,
or will make people to say, well, if I don't change, I won't survive, so I have to.
yeah,
So Chris, thanks very much. It was a brilliant conversation. I think thanks for sharing the grounded kind of insights and actually kind of real examples. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks very much, and thank you very much to everyone for watching and listening, especially to the ones who stay till the end and
that
watching
was the
us
best
now.
bit.
Yeah. Thank you for staying with us. Exactly. And I hope you found this episode valuable. We're going to have this as a recurrent theme. So we're going to have these internal conversations, I don't know, once a month or something like that. So hopefully you guys will kind of sign up. Sign up to the channel, subscribe. Please like it. That will help us grow. And I look forward to meeting you, Chris, again in the next episode, and all of you viewers in our next episode of Chain Reaction. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for tuning in to Chain Reaction. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have a story or insights to share from your sector, we'd love to hear from you. Simply reach out to us through the links in the description. See you next time.